A new analysis is taking a closer look at motivating factors driving Latino voters to the polls. President Biden won the Latino vote 65 to 32% in 2020. But post-election analysis shows Mr. Trump made inroads with the fast-growing voting bloc. According to exit polls, he grew his support among all Latinos by 4 percentage points compared to 2016. A progressive polling firm is taking a closer look at who those voters were. The report compiled data from over 40,000 interviews with Latino voters since 2019. It found former President Trump gained support from new and conservative Latino voters. Conservative Latino women, in particular, showed increased enthusiasm. 77% said they were very motivated to vote in 2020, compared to 68% in 2019. Chuck Rocha joins me now. Chuck was a senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns. He's also author of the book, Teal Bernie, the inside story of how Bernie Sanders brought Latinos into the political revolution. Welcome, Chuck. Nice to see you again. So even though President Biden won Latino women by 39 points, former President Trump's gains among Hispanic voters were female-driven. What messaging worked for Donald Trump?
I think it was deeper than just the messaging. I think it was the effort. I've been pushing back on this a little bit and explaining that what happened is Donald Trump actually went in and made the argument. Many Republicans just write off Latinas, conservative Latina women. And what Donald Trump did was actually go in and make an effort specifically in places like Miami-Dade, where the numbers you showed are even more dramatic, where he increased his percentage over Joe Biden compared to Hillary Clinton by 23 points with Latinos, Latinx staffers all across the country. We're talking about that and what happened in Miami-Dade. I think him showing up and him having a conversation early was a big part of this, and also motivating, as your numbers just showed, folks who had not participated in the electoral process before to show up. So I think those were two big factors here.
Well, do you see Democrats' failure to reach more Latinos as more of a messaging or an ideological issue?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think a lot of times Democrats mistakenly think that Latinos only care about immigration, where our polling, Eki's polling, lots of polling that you see out there from Latino strategists shows that Latinos are very concerned about COVID relief, jobs in the economy, and even education, where many times Democrats mistakenly only talk to Latinos about immigration. And I think that is a huge mistake. Secondly, I think it shows that you have to do more than just show up at the last minute and buy a bunch of Spanish language communications. So I think those two factors were big parts of why you saw this dramatic shift. And I think in the midterms coming up in 2022, some of the most important elections run through Latino heavy states and districts. What goes underreported is a majority of the congressional seats that Democrats lost were made up of over 50% people of color. So this is something that they have to address immediately.
And Chuck, how does identity, particularly racial identity, appear to factor into political affiliation among Latinos?
It's a great question. And it's hard for Latinos, Hispanics, Chicanos, Tejanos, Latinx. I show you all of those different meanings of who we are, showing how different all of our community is. I sound like an old white man when I talk because I grew up in East Texas, but I am Latino, just like a Cuban is in Miami, just like a Mexican in East LA who sounds much different than me. We consume information differently and we look at identity different. There was a study by Ian Hanley Lopez out of Berkeley this year that showed only 27% of Latinos see themselves as people of color. When you have Democratic operatives who are still running campaigns acting like brown voters and black voters look and act the same. When Black Americans have literally died for the right to vote, they've instilled this immense respect into the voting booth and making sure that their siblings vote and their children vote, where Latinos have not been here that long. Our average age is only 26 and a half. So that long-term infrastructure of teaching our young ones to vote is just not there like the Black community. So you can't treat us as equals.
Yes, no group is a monolith, as we've said time and time again, and that's especially true with the group of people known as Latinos. I know, Chuck, you say that there is a lot more that matters to Latino voters than just immigration, but I do want to ask you about this situation because it's something that we've seen a lot about in the headlines recently. So the influx of unaccompanied children at the southern border has been highly politicized. How do you see the Biden administration's handling of immigration impacting its standing with different groups of Latino voters?
This has been a long-term problem, like you've talked about, like lots of outlets have talked about, not something that's just happened overnight. Is there more immigration happening at this particular point? Yes. But immigration ebbs and flows with the season, around crops, around picking, around things that are going on with environmental catastrophes that are happening in other areas. And I do give the Biden administration a very much passing grade compared to what we have. But this is an impossible situation for a president alone to fix. Congress needs to act to make long-term solutions to a problem that's been broken for a long time. And you have seen both sides of the aisle use this as a political football because this is a very emotional issue. I just said that if you ask the question of what's the most important issue, why a Latino votes, they'll say jobs and the economy or COVID relief. But the emotional aspect of the journey that all of our families took to get here is very, very real when you talk about it in an emotional state. And when you see children who are having to be processed, who are coming here, risking their lives, going across deserts by themselves with coyotes, like this is something that's very visceral. And when a Latino sees that, when a Hispanic person sees this, there's an emotion that's triggered within them because of their own immigrant story. And that's what we need to think about when we're messaging this.
In our final minute, Chuck, you were a senior advisor to both of Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns. Is the Biden administration receptive to progressive policy goals like Medicare expansion or a bigger infrastructure bill?
I think his openness has been surprisingly refreshing. And I think a lot on the progressive side have seen that the people that he's appointed some of the most progressive immigrant rights activists that I know and some of my dearest friends who I've worked with on many progressive campaigns. So he's beginning his administration doing the right thing by walking the talk, putting people in power who are going to best reflect our community and stand for the values of our community. So right now, I give him a passing grade. We have a long way to go till the end, but the signs that I'm seeing right now are reassuring me that we are well on our way to a right and decent democracy.
All right, Chuck Rocha. Chuck, thank you very much.
Thank you.